A 1, 2, 3, 4. Welcome to Turntable Technique, the art of the DJ. What we're going to do in this program is treat the turntable as a musical instrument. There is a body of knowledge that has been handed down since ancient times and added to in each generation about playing musical instruments. It has to do with hand position, it has to do with vocabulary, it has to do with increasing the musicality of your playing. And my goal here is to apply that to the turntable itself. One of the things I want to do for you is give you the vocabulary to communicate with other musicians and composers in terms of quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes, and triplets. At the same time, we're going to be referencing the vocabulary of the turntable itself, invented by many of the pioneers like Grandmaster Flash, Kool Herc, Afrika Bambaataa, Grand Wizard Theodore, Grand Mixer DXT, and many, many others who have contributed to this vital new instrument and art form known as DJing and turntablism. We're going to start at the very beginning, assuming that you have just bought your first set of decks. So if you're a more advanced player, feel free to go on to further chapters. This is your basic setup: 2 turntables, a mixer, and some headphones for cueing. First thing you want to think about is how high you want your table to be. You want it to be a little over waist height, at least most people do, because you want it at a comfortable height to do scratching and mixing and moving around. If you have it too high, you start moving your wrist in funny ways, and that's not a good thing. The other thing you really want to think about is how sturdy the table is. You don't want the table to move around when you're scratching, when you're mixing, when you're flying back and forth. Also, you want it to be on something heavy if you can help it, in case you're playing on stage with other players, especially guitar players. Jumping around could easily make your needles skip. Unfortunately, you don't always have control over that. If you're out playing gigs all the time, sometimes you wind up on a folding table with your cases on top of that and your turntables on top of that. So you have to be prepared for that. But if you have control over it, try and get on something very, very sturdy, because that's going to help you out a lot. In terms of modes, this is what's called standard mode, where we have the tone arms right on the side facing the DJ. If you're mixing at a club, or if there are turntables installed in a club, a lot of times this is the setup that you're going to have. This is fine for mixing, for queuing up records, things like that. If you do a lot of scratching, you're probably going to want to put the tone arms across the top. If you put the one on the left across the top, if you happen to scratch this way, you can do your scratching on the left turntable here. This is called L mode, not named after the Muppet. And if you put both of these turntables up, this is what's called battle mode. The advantage to this mode is that both tone arms are up and out of the way, giving you free access to the entire platter. Most scratch DJs and battle DJs use battle mode for that reason. Let's talk about the turntable and its parts. The big round thing that spins around is known as the platter. The smaller round thing in the middle that you put the record over is called the spindle. The on-off switch is different places on different turntables. Most professional turntables have a separate on-off switch that does not, you notice, start the motor or engage the motor and get the platter spinning. Occasionally you'll do some scratching, like with some basic scratches and things like that, where you don't necessarily need for the platter to be moving, and so this can be handy for that. We have the juice coming from the cartridge, but the motor is not going around. To get the motor going or engaged, we use the start-stop button. In this case, on this turntable here, we actually have 2 start-stop buttons so that you can have a little bit more flexibility. Over here we have the 33 and the 45 speed selector buttons. This affects how quickly or how fast the platter is spinning. If you press down on both of these on this particular turntable, it also goes all the way up to 78. Now, it used to be that records did spin at 78 and 45. There's still a few records being put out that spin it that fast. These days, however, you use that probably more than anything else for doing things like melodic playing, stuff like this. Which brings us to the next thing we're going to talk about, which is the variable pitch control right here. These are generally sliders and affect how fast the record is playing. Which also generally affects the pitch. It used to be that standard was plus or minus 8%. These newer turntables, the Newmark TTX ones, actually let you go down to plus or minus 10%, or you can actually go down even further than that to plus or minus 20%, and even all the way down to plus or minus 50%, which gives you a lot more area that you can cover. Plus or minus 50% when you're talking about playing melodies. That gives you a full octave between minus 50% and 0, and a fifth between 0 and plus 50%, which really comes in handy if you do melodic playing. So let's move on now to the Q lever, which is this right here. The Q lever is basically just to take the tone arm and lift it up from the record. Most of the time you're going to be cueing records manually, so you would be placing the Q lever on, or you'd be placing the tone arm on the record itself without using the Q lever. However, there are a few creative uses for the Q lever. Let's talk about the tone arm. This is the tone arm here. They come in two different styles, a straight tone arm or an S tone arm. The straight tone arms tend to be a little bit better for scratching. The weights are at one end, the cartridge is at the other end. You can actually lock down the tone arm with the tone arm lock. You should do this whenever you are moving your turntable. Let's take off the cartridge here by loosening the tone arm tube lock and take a look at this. The cartridge houses the stylus, which is the tip here, and we can actually take off the stylus. Take a look at that. That's where your needle is, and that's likely to have to be replaced from time to time. Put it back into the cartridge here. Now, there are different kinds of cartridges. This cartridge has the leads at the end of it here. This is stereo, so you have hot and cold, left and right. If you notice when you're playing that your left channel or your right channel go out, sometimes it's because these leads are not making a really good connection. I've seen a lot of DJs take this off and lick this really quickly and put it back in, and that usually works. I'm not going to do it right now. But let's put this back in. You'll notice there is a little bump right here that you have to line up straight, and then we want to tighten the tone arm tube lock to put it back in place. Now, don't force it and don't tighten it too much. You just want it to be nice and snug, but this is kind of fragile right in here. Let's talk about the weights over here at the other end. The weights can be taken off of the tone arm, and really what these are is counterweights. If you were to put the tone arm onto the record without a weight at all, it would be way too heavy and would eventually break the stylus off. So the weight is a counterweight. I'll show you the official way to adjust this weight. What you want to do first is slide the weight onto the end of the tone arm until it basically makes the tone arm float. Gets it to 0 gravity. So we're pushing it on there until, I'm going to take the record off for this so that we don't scratch the record up. We're going to put it right over here, make sure that the Q lever is down, and we're going to try to get just enough weight to float the tone arm. It should be right in between there. There we go. See how that's kind of floating around? It doesn't go all the way down, doesn't go too far up. Now, when we do that, what we want to do is we want to put this to 0 right here on the black plastic portion without actually turning the weight. Just put the black plastic portion to 0. Then we can turn this entire weight assembly, and it has numbers there, 0.5, 1, 1.5, 2. Say you had a 3 gram recommendation that came with your cartridge. You could adjust it to 3 grams right there, and that would be giving you 3 grams of weight on your cartridge. Now, I'm going to take this off to give you a look, first off, at the numbers here that just float around like that. The standard way to put those on, or the recommended way from cartridge manufacturers, is to put them on like this. However, a lot of scratch DJs wind up turning the weight around and putting it on backwards in order to get more of the weight forward, because this is plastic here and doesn't weigh that much. More weight forward actually will put more weight on the cartridge itself to push down, but there's also a trade-off. You wind up wearing out your records quicker, and you can actually hear what's called burn-in. Actually, it sounds like white noise when you have a lot of weight on your cartridge. I've actually seen some DJs tape a nickel or a penny to their cartridge to get more weight, and I certainly don't recommend that. That's just for emergencies only. Generally speaking, things are going to sound better with the right amount of weight. If you need more weight, you can put a little bit more on, but what you really want to do is develop a light enough touch to where your tone arm is not going to skip anyway. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. Let's talk about adjusting the height of the tone arm now. The height adjustment is usually right here around the tone arm assembly. And if you notice here, as I'm cranking this, it's going down, so you can adjust it up or down. Most people like to leave it up most of the way. What this does is it adjusts the angle that the tone arm has coming into the record. And the theory is if you get it up a little bit, it's going to hold on to the grooves just a little bit more. The other thing that helps hold on to the grooves a little bit more is the anti-skating device right here. Most cartridges come with recommendations on how much weight you should have on and also what you should set your anti-skating device at. And they usually recommend setting it to the same number. In other words, if you have your weight at 3, then the anti-skating device is set at 3 as well. If you're turning your weight around to give it a little bit more weight, generally people will turn their anti-skating devices all the way up. What the anti-skating device does is it just provides a little more inward pressure on the stylus to where the needle is not going to skip outward. But it's a pretty subtle thing, so it's not going to make a huge difference. Some of you may be starting out on a belt drive turntable like this one. Belt drive turntables don't generally have as much torque as direct drive turntables. Well, they are set in motion by a pulley which attaches to the belt, which is what actually turns the platter. Sometimes it can take them a little bit longer to get up to speed, and like I said, they don't really have quite the torque. But a lot of people have started on these less expensive kind of turntables. When you can afford it, it's a good idea to move up to a direct drive. Let's talk about some of the more advanced features of several turntables, including this Newmark TT-X1. First off, take a look at the strobe light here. Now this is on almost all turntables, and what this will do is this will let you know if you're right on 0 or if you've actually altered the speed of the turntable. If you turn down the speed, you notice that suddenly it's much more apparent. When you're up to 0, it looks like everything is staying still. Same thing when you go faster. You can tell that you're not at 0 because you can actually see these things spinning, and how fast they're spinning will let you know how far away. Now, of course, you also on this have a display here, which lets you know all this stuff as well. But on turntables that don't have a display like this, it's a good idea to keep an eye on the strobe right there. A couple other features that some of the better turntables have is a forward-reverse button, which this turntable has right here, which lets you play things backwards. Actually, grooves going backwards have a very cool vibe of their own. I use these a lot in production, and it's nice to be able to do that just on the fly as well. A couple other features that the TTX has is we can adjust the start and the stop time. If we were to stop this, if we adjusted the start time here, and you can actually see it moving over here, we can go all the way up to almost 6, which corresponds to about 6 seconds. Let's get it down to about 3. And this will have the turntable start slowly and slowly get up to speed. Over here we can do the same thing on the stopping of the turntable. Let it kind of slowly grind down to a stop, which can be an effective thing to do at the end of a set. Starting up slowly and ending slowly. Now, of course, we can just turn these right back up to start instantly and stop and start instantly. And one of the reasons you want a turntable that has a lot of torque is that you want it to be able to start up really fast. And stopping fast is actually the work of the magnets inside of this thing. Let's talk about slip mats. It used to be that turntables came with these big rubber heavy mats, and the idea was to provide a lot of friction between the slip mat and the platter so that when you put a record on it, it would actually grip the record really well and spin the record. This doesn't really help very much when you're scratching, because in order to get the record to stop, a lot of times you wind up pushing down hard enough to also stop the platter, which is kind of hard on the motor, and it is kind of like taking a shower with your socks on. It just feels cumbersome. So most people these days will actually take off the rubber slip mat if you buy a turntable that still has a rubber slip mat that comes with it. Some of them have stopped selling these along with the turntable, and use a lighter weight slip mat that is actually made to provide less friction and actually let the record be more independent from the platter itself. This way, if you're queuing up, it's very easy to hold on to the record while you're not actually slowing down the platter. It's much easier on the motor of the record player. Now, if you're not getting quite enough separation between the platter and the record, another thing you can do is use one of these plastic slip mats, custom plastic slip mats that we put on here. And then you have even more separation between the record and the platter itself. Now, you can make these things really easily. Shall we see how? Let's do. Start out by using a record sleeve that you get off of just about any record. And the first thing you want to do is cut it into 2 pieces. So you can actually make 2 slip mats with one record sleeve. So we're just going to cut it in 2, like so. Next step is to try and make it about the right size. The way I like to do it is just to take the record and put it down on top of it, take a Sharpie, and outline the thing like this. Now you can also just cut it out this way with a straight razor, but if you do it that way, just make sure that you don't cut too deeply into whatever is underneath it, or else you're going to cut that too. Before you pick it up, it's a good idea to also mark where the hole is, so that you can also put a hole in the middle of it. Then all you've really got to do is just cut the thing out. I tend to cut it just a little bit on the inside of the line so that it's a little bit smaller than the record itself, because the slip mat is going to be a little bit smaller. You don't want this hanging out and running into your fingers while you're scratching. So we'll cut this thing around. There we go. Next thing to do is to put a hole in the middle here. What I usually do is I'll kind of fold it in half and take my scissors and just cut a little slit, like so, and fold it in half the other way. Cut another little slit right there. And this is a bit of an ongoing process. Sometimes it takes a little bit while to get the opening here in the middle all trimmed down. Let's try putting it on now and see if the opening is big enough. Take off our old one. There we go. Something else you can use to make that a little bit bigger, if you want, is just the end of a pen. We could try using the Sharpie since it's right here. You don't want it to be too snug, because the whole idea is for this to spin pretty freely. So we can try expanding it just a little bit like that. And voila! We have a custom plastic slip mat that will give us a little less friction between the slip mat itself and the platter. Let's talk about the ins and outputs of the mixer. DJ mixers are quite a bit different than mixers that you mix a band through or would use in a recording studio. One of the main differences is that there are a lot of RCA inputs and outputs on DJ mixers, which is because we plug in things like turntables to them. But first, let's plug in the power. Now the power, if it's on the back, if it has a separate power supply that you have to plug in, it's usually underneath the power switch. Often those things go together. In this case, it's on what's called a 5-pin DIN connector, which we will plug right into here. And then, you don't want to force this thing, you want to line up those DINs right like that. Next we have our balanced outputs. Now your more expensive professional mixers will have balanced outputs. This is what you want to send to your amplifiers, your house PA system if you're playing in a large club. And in this particular case, these are on 1/4-inch jacks. The 1/4-inch outputs that are really balanced or low Z are what we call tip ring sleeve. This is the tip, that's the ring, and that's the sleeve. And that's what we will plug right into the balanced output. We have the left and the right, which are going to go to the corresponding channels of the amplifier. Now this mixer also has quite a few other outputs, which is really handy. In this case it comes in handy because we're sending the record outputs to the camera so that you guys can hear what's coming out of here. You could also send the recording outputs to a tape recorder, so you could record your live show. And in this case it's on RCA jacks. We have the post and the shield here on the RCA jack. You notice that red and white is the color coding that's on the mixer itself, and these jacks are orange and gray. Orange and red are close enough for me, so I'm just going to use orange for red. Usually red depicts the right channel. So we'll plug this in as well so we can record from it. Let's take a look over here at the inputs. Now a lot of DJ mixers give you the choice to either have a phono input or an auxiliary input. An auxiliary input would be used more for CD players, MP3 players, things like that. Phono input implies that there is a phono preamp in there, and the phono preamp, as we had discussed previously, also has the RIAA EQ curves. So if you're going out of a traditional phonograph or turntable, such as a Technics 1200, you'd need to plug into the phono preamp. Now, the other important thing about plugging in most turntables is that you have this ground wire right here. So you need to plug in the right and left channels on the RCA to the phono, and then you need to look for the ground post. Now, some DJ mixers have separate ones for each channel. You don't really need that. You really just need one ground because it's not going to give you any crosstalk. So what we'll do is we'll put the ground lead underneath this post, and then you have to screw it down to tighten it up so that thing is not going anywhere. If it does go somewhere, a lot of times you'll get a lot of buzz and it's not a happy situation. So you want to make sure that if you're using a phonograph where you have a ground cable, that thing is really well in place. And then in this case we would push this aux over to phono so that the phonograph or the turntable is plugged in. Now, in the case of what we're really hooking up here, this is just for a demonstration, because the turntables we're using, the TTX1s, we're going to be using them in line out mode. As we discussed when we were looking at the turntables, they actually have phono preamps built in, and there's some features that we can utilize when we're coming line out. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be plugging the turntables into the line inputs here and make sure that the switch is over to aux 1, and I'll turn and plug the other turntable into the line input of channel 3. And I hope you're listening to this with audio, because if you're not, you're going to think this guy is nuts. But these turntables actually have phono preamps in them, so you don't have to have the ground leads attaching to the mixer. As well, they also give you some other features as well that we'll talk about in terms of digital processing and being able to adjust the pitch and the speed without adjusting the pitch. I'm also going to plug in a drum machine, and I'm going to plug that into the line input of channel 2. On the other end of this cable are 1/4-inch adapters on the RCAs. You can get these just about anywhere, and they just snap on. They have female RCA and male 1/4-inch just right on the adapter. It's also very common to buy a cable that has the RCA on one end and the 1/4-inch on the other end, so I can plug in my drum machine. Now, if I wanted to, I could have the drum machine come into channel 3, have the other phono come into channel 2. It really doesn't matter. It's whatever you prefer. Let's move down here and talk about the effects. You have your effects send, which is what you would plug into your effects device. Your effect return is what you would take the output of your effects device from to return it to your mixer. In this case, we are using these metal posts to, in effect, normal from the sends to the returns. In case we don't have any effects plugged in, if someone hits the effect send on the mixer itself, it's not going to affect the signal any because it's just going straight from the send to the return, so it's not going to break the normal unless we unplug this thing right here. The other output here is our pre-fader level. Pre-send, PFL, stands for pre-fader level. What that means is that it is just taking a look at the preamp, and it's not taking any heed to the up fader itself, but it's just sending out whatever is selected on pre-fader level. That's also how to cue into your headphones from this mixer, is to press the pre-fader level button as well. And then we have a couple other outputs. We have the output for the booth, which if you're playing in a club that has a DJ booth, you have a separate output for the booth so you can control the volume in the booth itself. Sometimes that's really important if you're playing in a really loud club, to crank up the booth enough to where you can really tell where the beat is, because often down on the dance floor with subwoofers and things like that, sound travels very slow, and you're actually going to feel that energy coming from the kick drum a few milliseconds after it happens. If you're trying to do things like beat matching and things like that, that can be really distracting. So your booth send is pretty important. And then we also have another master output on RCA if you don't have an XLR or a balanced output. We have an unbalanced output as well right here. So that, in a nutshell, are our inputs and outputs on the back of the mixer. Let's look at the controls on the face of our mixer. If you take a look at the whole thing here, you see we've got 3 channels in this particular mixer. Some DJ mixers have only 2 channels, some have 3, 4, 5. This one's got 3. These are what we call our up faders right here. This is the cross fader, which fades between the different program material that happens up here. Each channel has got its own preamp, gain, EQ, treble, middle, bass. We have a switch for pre-fader level, which we'll talk about in a bit, and a switch to go between phono and line. On the right-hand side of the mixer, we have our master section, and on the left-hand side of the mixer, we have our mic section as well as our effects processing. Down here, we have kill switches for low, mids, and highs, which we'll talk a little bit about. But first, let's get going trying to play something through this thing. The first thing that we need to do once we get a record playing, if we actually want to hear it, is to give it some free amplification. Right up here at the top of the channel strip, we have gain. This is referring to the preamp. So we're going to give it a little bit of preamplification right here, and you'll notice that we start getting some action over here on our LEDs. This is telling us that the preamp is up and we're getting some signal. Then what we need to do is turn up the up fader, and as we fade that in, we're actually getting signal. Now we could turn the signal off by flipping the switch, and in fact as we get into this we're actually going to be using the switch to do some playing as well as the up fader. Okay. Now if we move on down, you'll notice the crossfader is in the middle. If we were to put this over to the left, we would actually fade out what we had going on in channel 3, because the way we have this hooked up is what's in channel 1 is going to be to my left, what's in channel 3 will be over here on my right. And to illustrate this some more, let me get something totally different playing over here on the right. And we'll turn up what we have on channel 3 as well. Try cross-fading between the two, which is an absolutely terrible mix, but it gives you the idea. Without being too subtle, that we have 2 different program material and we're able to switch back and forth from the crossfader. Take a look at the front or the DJ side of the mixer. We have an input and an output as well. Over here we have a microphone input. Almost all DJ mixers have a mic input, which is usually on a 1/4-inch cable. So we could plug in a microphone. The thing is, the microphone's got to be one that ends up in a 1/4-inch cable. Some have the 3-prong XLR. In that case, you need a transformer or an adapter. And also over here we have our headphone output. Now, fortunately on this Matrix mixer, they give us both the 1/4-inch out and an 1/8-inch out. So if you're using a headphone that has the 1/8-inch jack, which a lot of them do these days, and they have the adapters, if you lose the adapter you can still plug right into there. But you notice a stereo headphone is tip ring sleeve. Instead of using the extra connection for hot, cold, and ground, they actually use it for left and right. So we're going to plug that right into the headphone output. On the front or the DJ's side of the mixer, there are sometimes some controls as well, at least on more professional models. One of the most important ones is right here in the middle, which is the contour control for the crossfader itself. Now in this particular case, we can continuously adjust this control to either have the opposite side cut in very, very early in the trajectory of the crossfader, Or if we take it all the way over to this side, it's a very, very gentle slope where the crossfader will travel for quite a little ways towards the center before the opposing channel even comes in at all. And then it's a very, very gentle fade in of the opposing channel and the fade out of the channel that you were on as you travel from one end to the other. That's very appropriate when you're doing mixes, when you're doing a slow crossfade. On the other hand, when you are scratching, especially when you're doing things like the transformer and the crab scratch especially, it's nice to be able to adjust this control to your own individual taste. I usually don't put it all the way over to where it's just a very hard in and out, but just a little bit further out when I'm doing crabs. And when I'm operating on a new mixer, what I'll do is I'll do some crab exercises and I'll adjust this slope control to fit my playing. And that's what you really should do, is just adjust it to fit your own individual playing style. This is a 3-channel mixer, and so one of the things that we have that can be somewhat confusing are these two controls here, which are to assign which channels are going to be operated by the crossfader. Now in this case I have one turntable plugged into the first channel and one turntable plugged into channel 3, and so I have the left one on 1, the right one on 3. If I were to plug the other turntable into channel 2, for instance, I could just flip that, and now the crossfader is going to crossfade between 1 and 2. I could also go between 2 and 3 if I wanted to, just by adjusting these right here. The direction right here is the crossfader direction. On the left it's normal. In the center the crossfader is actually off, which means that all 3 faders are working and being sent to the master output. And if we go all the way over to the right, this is reverse mode. It's also called hamster mode. And what this is it flips the controls of the mixer to where if you have the crossfader over to the left, the right channel is actually, or the fader on the right is actually going to be turned up, and vice versa. Some DJs started doing this and actually started just rewiring their mixer and plugging the turntable on their left into the right inputs and the turntable on the right into the inputs on their left, so that they could operate the crossfader in reverse like this. It became known as hamster mode, I think, for the bulletproof scratch hamsters. And since then, manufacturers start building this in. Just it's a simple switch, and that way you don't have to go and rewire your mixer. Some DJs actually use both standard and hamster mode for different techniques, so it's really handy to have this control right here. Let's see what that taper switch does to the crossfader here. Again, we have totally disparate things going on channel 3 and on channel 1. So let's go over to channel 1. And as we crossfade, if you take a look at the LED here on the left, we were getting this channel. As we go over, you see that the LED on the right channel lights up, and then as we move on over, the LED on the left fades out. Now, if I actually adjusted this to where the taper would be a lot tighter, you notice that the cut-on point now for the crossfader is just a couple millimeters in, which is going to be great for doing transformers and crabs and things of that nature. But if I put it right in the center, it's a pretty nice long crossfade all the way around. So that's what that taper control is all about, and it really is a handy thing to have. Let's talk about the kill EQ here. Over on the side of each of the up faders, we have these kill controls for low, mids, and highs. If we wanted to take the bass out of this program, for instance, we could just hit that kill switch. It's a momentary switch when you pull it to you, or you can take it off entirely by pushing it up. Same thing with the mids. Just leave our hi-hat. If we wanted to take a hi-hat track from one record and mix it with another record, we could take out the bass and practically everything in the middle. Take out the highs, we have nothing left. Consequently, if we also wanted to just take a bass line from a record, we could do that as well. This comes in handy. I'll show you later on. I'll mix some horns from one track onto another track, and the kill switches can kind of come in handy for that. Now we also have controls that do EQ in a little bit more of a subtle manner up here closer to the top of the channel switch, bass, middle, and treble. They will also kill these frequencies if you take them all the way up to the left, but you can also do a lot more subtle kinds of EQing because they're on pots. These are called pots, by the way, the kind of round things that you control turning up and down, and these are called faders, the ones that go up and down like this, or the crossfader. So we've got bass, middle, and treble. We can also turn up these pots as well. They're not just kill, but we can also use them to accentuate the highs. A lot of times when you're scratching, you'll turn the treble up on the sound that you're scratching with to give it more of a cut-through kind of nature. Okay, so that pretty much takes care of the EQ. Let's talk about the pre-fader level right here, pre-FL. We had mentioned that before. What we're going to use this for most of the time is going to be mixing our headphones. In this case, I've got the up faders entirely down, but if I wanted to hear something in the headphones, what I could do is I could turn the headphone volume up, which is an important thing to do, and then also hit the pre-fader level, and I would start getting this through the headphone. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my headphones right here, and I'm going to actually put them close to the mic so you can hear what's going on here. I'll turn that up a little bit. So the pre-fader level now is what's sending this channel, which the up fader is all the way down, and still is sending it to my headphones so that I could hear it before the audience does. That's basically what pre-fader level is doing for me. Now if we take a look at the mix control right here above the headphone volume control, what we have here is if we go all the way to the right, I'm going to go ahead and turn this up a little bit. I'll tell you what, I'll turn up what's on the turntable on my left. So that's the program. If I go all the way over to the right here, that's what's going to be coming out of my headphones. If I go all the way over to the left, that's not going to be coming out of the headphones at all. But if I hit the pre-fader level right here on channel 3, I'll be able to hear through the headphones, at least, just what's coming onto channel 3. I can then theoretically get these things in sync, whatever I would like to do. I can mix the two together in my headphones if I'd like, and then I can fade from one to the other. I'm going to turn all this off because it's very confusing, but let me just wind up that conversation by saying part of being a DJ is being able to listen to two things at the same time. You've got the record that you're queuing up, you've got the record where you're looking for things to play, you've got the record that's already being played and is going out to the audience. You've got to, in a way, kind of be able to separate your mind into two halves to where you're listening to what's coming up while you still are listening to what's going on currently. So the audience is never actually hearing you cue things up and backspin on records and stuff like that, which we'll be talking about in the queuing section. Let's try adding some effects to our mix. If we take a look over on the left-hand side, we have a processing blend, which is our effects send and return, put together in one handy-dandy little control right here. Now what we've done is we've actually plugged in an effects processing unit into the sends and returns that we were taking a look at a little bit ago. And what we plugged in is this nifty little air effects by Alesis here. And we'll use this to put a little effects on our channel 1. Now in order to be able to hear the effects, you have to do two things. You have to enable the process button on the individual channel, which is channel 1. Then you also have to turn up the process and blend. I'm going to turn it up all the way first so that you can hear it. What we've got here is a pretty extreme filter on the air effects, which actually works by using your hand over the top of it. When my hand isn't over it at all, it sounds normal. When I come in, it uses both the height of my hand and the position off to the side to adjust that filter. If we back off the effect a little bit here, the process blend, you can hear that we hear a mix of both the dry signal, or the unaffected signal, and the process signal. If I go all the way over to the left here to where I'm just hearing the dry signal, it doesn't matter what I do with the effects, we're not hearing it. As we bring it in here, you'll be able to hear it more and more. And if I turn it all the way up, basically all we will hear is the what you call the wet signal or the affected signal. So that, in a nutshell, is how to use effects on this mixer. First step in mixing is learning how to cue, so let's talk about cueing. We have a record here we'd like to cue up. Let's start the platter moving, and then we're going to put the stylus right on here until we hear something. Now you might do this in the headphone, but here I have it just coming out of the speakers. There we go. We hear the first note. We're going to hold on to the record. You could stop it if you wanted to, stop the platter moving. Then we bring it back, and we can hear that. That's called backspinning. Now what we do next is what a lot of people call scrubbing, which is an old tape term, where we're going back and forth just to figure out where is the exact beginning of this record. Now, there's a few different ways to set the record in motion. The first one, obviously, is with the start-stop button. So in this case, I'm going to set it back just a little bit, and then I'm going to leave a little bit of space in between where the needle is and where the start of the record is, so that when I hit the start-stop button, we immediately go into the record. Now, let's backspin again, get back to the top. This time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the record in motion while I'm grasping it with my hand. One move that you see DJs doing a lot, whether they realize it or not, is starting the platter moving with their thumb while they're holding onto the record, or after they get something queued up, stopping it for later queuing. So what we're going to do here is we've got this thing just about ready to start, and we're just going to set it in motion with our hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's just another way of setting the record in motion and cueing it. Marking the record is something that we're going to talk about. People mark records with all sorts of different things. Some people like to use cassette labels like this. These are something that I got at a supply shop for offices, as well as these. DV labels, DAT labels, they all work well. In a case like this, if we were wanting, for some reason, to mark the beginning of this take, we could do it, say, with one of these DV labels right here. Some people will mark the record to where the beginning of the track is actually marked by putting a label pointing straight up, as though this was a clock. Straight up 12 o'clock. Not everybody does this, but that way we know when we bring it back, that's where it starts. And when we get into a little more creative cueing later on, that's going to come in handy. Other people, however, will mark their records to where the mark itself is pointing right at the stylus, where the stylus hits the record, and they find that a little bit more useful. It really depends on your own preference in terms of marking records. We're going to put some of the cueing things that we just learned into practice here and try playing a couple records together. Let's start out by queuing up the record that we're going to feature first, which is the second track here on Turntable Technique. There we go. So listen to a little bit of this. This is kind of a slow, trancey kind of vibe with a little bit of trumpet in it, which doesn't come in until a little later. There we go. A little Miles Davis-ish kind of harmon mute type of thing. So what I'm going to do is first off cue this thing up, back to the top, all the way back to the top. There we go. Okay, so we'll just leave that there. And let's go find something to play over there. Let's first off, let's find a little bit of trumpet that we might could fly in on top of that. Just perfect. It's got a little bit of trumpet. It's kind of in the same key. So we're gonna take that, and what we would probably do if we were going to do this at a club or in a concert, we would mark this record so that we could find it easily once we're on stage. So we'll take a little bit of one of these little markers right here, little tabs, and what we'll do is we'll put it right in at the beginning of the sample. Let's check it again. There's the top of it right there. And we'll mark this right near it. Now some people get just right up to the exact groove, and more power to them. Okay, so what I think I would do here too is don't hesitate making it easy on yourself. I'm actually just going to write on here TPT for trumpet. So I'll remember that this is my trumpet sample right here for later on. Then I've got a couple other tunes that I've been looking around for that are going to match up tempo-wise from this. I'll try flying in some horns off of another number, and try using the pitch control to use a little bit of synthesizer off the end of ending loop of this record. So let's just give it a shot, shall we? Go ahead and turn this one down. So I'm going to cue up in my headphones this trumpet sample that we found so I can play that in. So I'm listening to it at my headphones. I've got it now. Now I can, since the trumpet's playing there, I'm going to play it kind of in between. Back it up. Play it again. Bring the fader down. I'm actually going to go forward a little bit and find some 8th note, 16th note runs in the trumpet, which I'm going to mix in as well. I could actually play those backwards now. It's amazing how similar some things sound backwards as forwards, and if something works forwards, you might want to try it backwards as well. Okay. So I'm going to switch to another record, and you notice that I have that record already on the platter underneath this record, which is a technique you can use if you want to make a quick change. You can actually play a continuous tone. You hear the synth tone coming in? I've got a tone here, which if I put it on 45, it's an A, which is the key that this is in. And then I can also hit it back down to 33, and I wind up with an E, which is the 5th. And I can also take it back up to 45, speed it up to get the minor 3rd, take it down a little bit more, major 2nd. So if you want to fade in some continuous notes like this over something. That's what I'm doing there. Now, I'm going to cue up another tune here, which I'm listening to it in my phones. I'm back spinning it to try to get the downbeat. Got into the drum break, okay. Alright, there's the kick. Now this is in the same tempo as this other song, but it's a totally different sounding kind of piece. But I'm going to use it to kind of beef up the rhythm. See if I can sync them up. Pretty close. Now, a couple things I could do here when I have this in sync. One is, if I wanted to just try to take the snare off of this new piece, I could do that with the crossfader. Let's try that. So I'm just taking the snare from the second song, grafting it on the first part. Now there's also some horn parts that I could graft in. I could turn the bass down so the bass of this other song doesn't affect the song that I'm mixing quite so much. There's a clavinet. Now what I could do is fade the bass back in on the new song and fade the bass out on the old song. And what that's going to do is essentially segue from the old song into the new song. Now, I still have the new song playing here, but basically all I'm hearing now that I've kind of killed the bass is just some of the trumpet and some of the synthy stuff that's going on, the falling down. So essentially I've gone from one song to the next, using EQ as kind of a bridge between the two songs. So that's just a few ideas that you can hopefully use in your own mixing with various kinds of records to give you a place to start.
2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2.
Extending breaks is something that's been around for quite a while. Back in the day of DJ Cool Herc, Grandmaster Flash is credited with really taking this and making it into an art form and getting just really good at it. The way I'm going to demonstrate this is actually not extending a drum break in the middle of a track, which is what you would use this for generally. Back in the day, to get the B-boys and the B-girls something to dance to and keep them going, you would wait for the break of the record, which a lot of times comes, you know, inside the middle of the record, and try to extend that drum break to where it will give the dancers, you know, that much more opportunity to do their thing. To demonstrate this, I think it's going to be easier to use the top of this record, which has a countdown on it. So we'll find the first one, the first countdown. There it is right there. So the first thing we'll do is we'll mark that record. Find the top of that sample. And then I'm going to mark this with a cassette label, and I'm going to mark it up at 12 o'clock. Now, like I said, some people mark records to where they're pointing at the needle. Some people mark them right up at 12 o'clock. You can really do whatever works best for you, but let me mark this one up at 12 o'clock. And then I have another copy of the exact same record over here on the second turntable with the same countdown. So we'll stop that, and I'm going to mark this one in exactly the same way. The idea here is that you have two of the same record. And you could do this the same if you were marking the middle of the record or the part of the drum break that you wanted to grab. That would work as well. But we're going to do this just to demonstrate where exactly we're coming back to and what we're doing. So the idea here is that we'll let one fly, and we'll use the crossfader to go over to the second one to start it at exactly in time. And after we move the crossfader over, we're going to backspin the first record, get that ready in the same place that we started. Once record number 2 has gone on for 4 bars, we'll spin the first record, put the crossfader right back to the channel that the first turntable is on, and we'll backspin the second one. And the idea here is that we want this to sound as though the beat is just going on. Now in this case, you're just going to hear the countdown over and over and over again just to illustrate this a little more easily, what's going on. So we'll just give this a shot. We'll set record number 1 into motion.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 1.
So you get the idea. You can extend this for as long as you like. We're just doing 4 bars there. You could do 8 bars, you could do 16 bars, you could do less than that, you could do 2 bars. This is also the foundation for beat juggling. A little later on, Steve D came up and started making a lot more complex things, taking it into 3/4 time, taking it into 6/8 time, and juggling the beats back and forth. So if you want to get into beat juggling, first step is to learn to extend breaks. Beat matching. To start our conversation on beat matching, what I'd like to talk about is the anatomy of a drum beat. Most drum beats are made up of 2 primary characters, that is the kick drum and the snare. Now these can sound a little bit different. Kicks come in different varieties, as do snares, but they function essentially the same. Usually kick drums are on the downbeats and snares are on the upbeats, meaning that the kick drum is usually on beats 1 and 3, snare is usually on 2 and 4. To demonstrate this, the anatomy of a typical drum beat would be like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now in techno music and other forms of dance music that derive from techno music, often the kick drum has what's called 4 on the floor, which sounds like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. The snare is still on 2 and 4, but the kick is actually on all 4 beats. Once you've figured out what the kick and the snare sound like, then it's a fairly easy matter to start counting bars. What you want to do is listen for the kick, listen for the snare. Sometimes it's a little harder than other times because there's a lot of other things in there, hi-hats and other things that are doing what's called subdividing the beat. But what you want to do is listen to, okay, where's the downbeats? What's functioning as the kick? And then you can count bars like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4. Now you notice that the beat was kind of morphing and changing in 4-bar patterns. Music has patterns all over the place, and those usually come in even numbers. 2-bar patterns are very common in many forms of dance music. In fact, a lot of DJs teach that the 2-bar pattern is really the most important. And some people teach not to count the bars themselves, but just to count to 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Essentially what you're doing there is you're counting 2-bar phrases. That can be okay for a lot of stuff. But it's also important, I think, to realize that music often comes in 4-bar phrases, 8-bar phrases, 16-bar phrases. Typical song form is actually 32-bar phrases. So if you're dealing with various styles of music, you need to get really familiar with your records and figure out how long these phrases are. Obviously, if there's a vocal or something like that, that will help you cue as well. You don't always have to be just, counting like mad, I'm on bar 14 or bar 15. You really need to combine that with listening. But figuring out what is the kick, what is the snare, where's the downbeat, and then being able to count bars is really essential to DJing, and especially once you start getting into beat matching. BPM stands for beats per minute. Eventually you want to get to where you can just listen to a beat and say, I think that's about 120 BPM or 130 BPM. But to get there, you need to figure out the BPM of a lot of different records. The easiest way to do it if you don't have any other gear is just to count the beats. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Count beats for like 15 seconds, multiply by 4, and you have the beats per minute. That's what we're looking for. There's a lot of devices that can actually help you out, and you can do it a lot quicker. One is this beat keeper right here, and you can also do this on some metronomes, and, like the Dr. Beat by Boss. And what you're doing here is you're just hitting a button, and it's basically telling you about how fast you're punching in this beat. Now, in this case, the beat keeper is actually also a very sophisticated beat detection device that has now been built into the Newmark TTX1 as well. So what we can do is just play at the beat, and it will listen, it'll figure out what it thinks the kick drum is, what it thinks the snare is, and then it'll come up with what the BPM is for us and give us a readout on that, which makes it just really easy. So what you want to do is you want to go through your records, you want to figure out the BPM of most of the records that you're going to use. That way, when you're playing a gig and you're looking through your records trying to find something that you might want to beat match, you know whether this record is a possibility or not. Eventually you basically memorize, what the BPM of your different records are. But at first, don't be afraid to write it down. Most people do. So, developing a sense for BPM and BPMing your records is a big step. Syncing 2 records is really not too hard, and I can give you a few tips and techniques to make it even easier. First thing we'll do is we'll try syncing 2 of the same record at the same place and trying a few creative things that way. The only difference being when you're syncing 2 different records is that you then also have to adjust the BPM of both records, or one or the other record at least, to get them both in sync with each other. So we're going to try this little R&B thing at the beginning of turntable technique again. The first thing you got to do is you got to locate the downbeat of one of the records. So we're going to look for the kick drum on the first beat after this countdown. 1, 2, and that's it right there. Now this is pretty typical. You might not just have the clean kick drum by itself, but you might have other stuff going on. We've got some horns here, we've got kind of the end of the count off, but what we're looking for is that attack right there. You can try turning your bass up a little bit too sometimes, just if you're not quite sure, just to try to find that bass drum right there. So, okay, so we're holding on to the bass drum. Let's start the other record and we'll try to get it in sync right at that spot. Okay, so they're both going here. They're almost in sync. You notice how you hear a little bit of phasing, phase shifting, or flanging. You can actually use that as an effect. It's kind of a cool effect. But it also tells you that you're not quite in sync. So we can try to determine which record is a little ahead, which record is a little behind, by a couple ways. One is with the headphones. You see DJs all the time with their headphones, one headphone on, one headphone off, or just holding onto the headphone like this. A lot of DJ mixers will let you split the signal to where you're going to hear one in one side and one in the other. That can work pretty well. You can also take a look at your meters. If you've got LED meters like we have on this mixer, that can help you figure out which one is ahead and which one is behind. Also, if you have something like that, that Newmark Beat Keeper, that'll actually tell you which one is behind, which one is ahead. So let's see here. Looks like we might be a little behind. Let's try spinning the label on the one on the right. Now we got it and then we passed it. So spinning the label here is something that we're trying to do to speed this record up a little bit. Since we got it a little too far ahead, what we might do to try to slow it back down is called dragging the platter, where we actually just drag. And again, when you start hearing the flanging, you know you're getting close. Okay, so we're back to being pretty close. Let's pass it again. Let's slow it down too far. Okay, now you hear the flam on the kick. That's what it's called, is when two drums are almost right together, but they're not. It's flamming. So now we're a little too slow again. So this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to try using the spindle, and I'm going to try going just a little faster than the record itself is going on the spindle, until we get them just right about in sync again. And I might actually speed it up a little too far again. Okay, so I think I've passed it again. There we go. Just so I can show you that you can do the opposite on the spindle as well. You can actually squeeze a little bit on the spindle to slow it down. So we've got 4 techniques here. We have spinning the label to catch up just a little bit. We've got dragging the platter to slow it down a little bit. We've got spinning the spindle to catch up. And we've also got squeezing the spindle to slow it down. You can slow things down and speed them up too using the pitch slider here, which a lot of people do instead of any of this other stuff. This is in quartz mode right now. I'm going to take that off of quartz mode because quartz mode means that it's just going to sync to a crystal inside to right at 33 1/3. So I'm going to now try speeding this sucker up a little bit until it gets right in sync. I'll take it back to 0. Speed it up a little bit more and get it ahead. And it's about to end. So that ends our lesson in syncing 2 of the same record. Scratching was invented by Grand Wizard Theodore back in the 70s. When you're scratching, the first thing you want to keep in mind is you want to have a nice light touch. with your hand. I see a lot of kids that are starting out and they really push down hard on the record, and what happens when you do that is you actually hear it, especially the low end. Now you can help this by pulling off the bass on your mixer. That helps a lot. But what you really want to do is develop a light touch. Even with the platter spinning, and it's a good idea to practice grabbing the record and being able to hold on to it without moving it around with the platter spinning. And you want to just hold on to it just as much as you have to and not any more than that. It's a very common thing with all instruments that you only want to expend as much energy as you have to, because you don't want to get really tight. If you're really holding on too tightly and you're getting all tensed, you're going to feel it in your shoulder and your elbow and your wrist eventually. And if that happens, just stop for a second, shake things down. Basically what happens is acid comes and gets in your joints, and you want to just aid the circulation to get that out of the way, so you keep everything nice and fluid. Gripping the record, there's a few different ways to do it. Most people, grip the body of the record. Since your middle finger is longest, that tends to hold on to it pretty well, but sometimes a combination of these three fingers right here. But there's no real standard way. A lot of the pioneers used to grab the edge of the record here, and it can be easier to grab it there sometimes. If you're having a hard time grabbing the body of the record, try grabbing the edge. You can usually get a hold of it there pretty well. Also, you can get a hold of the space in between the label and the last track pretty easily as well. So that's another place that you can try grabbing it if you can't grab it somewhere else. Now, sometimes brand new records can be harder to get a hold of and grip than records that have been broken in. After you scratch a record for a while, I think the oil from your fingers and things kind of gets onto the record, and it's a little easier to grip the thing. Also, if your hands get too dry, it's sometimes very hard to get a hold of the record. One thing you can do with that is just to get a bottle of water, and it's good to drink water anyway, just to have a bottle of water sitting by. Usually there's enough condensation on it that you can just grab it, and that'll be enough for you right there. Something I do sometimes is I'll even just grab a paper towel, put a little water on it, have it sitting there. It looks kind of funny, but that way if you need to, you can just get a little water on your fingers from your paper towel. That's another way you can do it. You can also get this stuff at office supply stores, which is basically for people who handle a lot of paper, and it's just to kind of get a little friction, a little moistness on your fingers. If you use this stuff though, what you really want to do is you want to rub it into your fingers pretty good, because if you get too much of it on your fingers and it gets all over your records and it gets on your needles, and it has somewhat of a residue. So you want to develop light touch, you want to keep everything nice and loose, and keep your hands moist. The basic scratch is the easiest of all the scratches, because you're not using any of the faders on the mixer, you're just using the record itself. So you find some good noise like this track of white noise, or the ah sample, the fresh sample, something like that, and you're set to go. You can actually make some music with the basic scratch. The way to do it is to obviously be musical. Try to work in some silence, try to work in some dynamics. The faster that you go on the basic scratch, in other words, if you're going slowly, you'll get that kind of sound. The faster you go, the higher the frequency or the pitch is of the sound, and also the volume will come up a little bit as well. So experiment around with all the different sounds that you can get just off of the basic scratch. Then try and put a beat with it, and try making some music. Again, you'll find that if you leave a little bit of space, it's going to be a lot easier to make music. Now, if you're playing with a record or with a band or something like that that's got singing on it versus musical phrases, A lot of times the basic scratch can be used easily for mixing, well, for filling, for putting in some fills. So I'm going to let a bar go by and then I'm going to do a little fill just to give you an idea of that. So here you go. 1, 2, 3, 4. You get the idea. With the basic scratch, the way we were leaving space in between the notes and actually defining when the notes are starting and stopping was by changing direction of the record hand. We go all the way up, we come all the way back. That's how we get different notes. The concept of tears is that you only go halfway down on the record and then you stop, and then you go the other half of the way and stop again. So you're splitting that stroke up into two, or you could even do more than that. It's a lot like a string player, a violinist, a cellist, somebody like that, using a bow. They can either use the whole bow or they can use part of the bow, half of the bow, a third of the bow, and keep going the same direction and go back again. Same thing with the record. A lot of times tears are used to play triplets, where you're splitting a measure or a couple of beats into 3 equal parts. You can do that either starting with a forward stroke or with a backward stroke. Forward stroke, you're pushing the record forward, or the backward stroke, obviously you're pulling back. Now, a couple things to keep in mind when you're doing tears. One is that you want to be as quiet as you can or as silent as you can in between the notes. In other words, you don't want to go halfway and then kind of be moving the record around like this, go the other half of the way, be moving the record around. You want to stop as cold as you can, and it's not too easy at first, especially if you're doing it slowly. You hear those little movements in there? Of course, the faster you do it, the less that's going to be an issue. But you want to practice it to where you're putting some nice silence in between there. So let's take a look at starting with a forward stroke and with a backward stroke. That's basically what tears are. Let's try it with a beat here, so you get the hang of what they sound like in an actual piece of music. Little space. So that, in a nutshell, is tears. In the next section, we're going to learn some rhythmic notation and scratch examples found in our book, Turntable Technique, The Art of the DJ. If you really want to get these moves down and practice them, you'll want to pick up a copy of this book and 2-record set. It contains a lot of hands-on exercises, scratch sounds, and play-along tracks. You can even read interviews with top DJs such as DJ Swamp, Mixmaster Mike, and DJ Qbert. To get the book and vinyl set, ask for it at your local retailer, go to toolsfordjs.com, or call 1-866-Berkle. If you don't read rhythms, this is the great time to start. Sure, you can play the turntable or any other instrument without being able to read music, just like you can speak English without being able to read and write English. But being able to read music is going to let you communicate better with your fellow musicians, with composers, with people that play other instruments, so I highly recommend it. So, let's get started. First off, let's take a look at what you put music on. What you put music on is a staff. Most staffs have 5 lines and 4 spaces, and in between different bars there's just a line that goes down. We call that a bar line. Pretty easy stuff. For percussion instruments, some percussion instruments, including the turntable, a lot of people don't use all 5 lines. You use those to denote different pitches, and it can be a little less cluttered if you just use a single line. You can call that a scratch staff if you want, or you can just call it a percussion staff. The thing that you usually put at the beginning of some music, there's a couple things. First off, we have a time signature. 4/4 time is what the vast majority of hip-hop and other kind of dance music forms are in. The top 4 indicates that there's 4 beats per measure. The bottom 4 indicates that a quarter note is going to get 1 count. Pretty easy stuff. And then also, beginning of each line of music, there is usually some sort of clef. It's either a treble clef or a bass clef, or in the case of percussion instruments, there can be a neutral clef, which is just there to denote that there's no actual denotation of pitches in the passage of music that you're going to be using. Of course, you can play pitches on the turntable, and for that you would use the treble clef or the bass clef. Next, let's just take a look at a note. This is a quarter note. It has 2 main components, the head and the stem. In 4/4 time, it gets 1 count. So, let's just take a look at writing some music down and playing it back in terms of forward and backward strokes on the basic scratch. Underneath the notes, you see we have little arrows going up and down. The arrows going up are just going to denote a forward stroke. The arrows going back are going to denote a back stroke. So this one bar right here is just going up, and back. All quarter notes, all underneath the scratch staff. That's where we're going to put the notes for the record hand. It's going to be very easy. You still have to have something written down in order to hold your place, even if you're not playing. The space in between the notes is known as a rest. The quarter rest looks like this. It gets 1 beat in 4/4 time, just like a quarter note does. Also, repeat signs look like this. When you put repeat signs on either side of a bar, or 2 bars, or 4 bars, what it means is you're just going to play that entire section again. This is an 1/8 note. It has a stem and a head, just like a quarter note, but we also add the flag. In 4/4 time, 1/8 note gets 1/2 of a beat. When you put more than 1/8 note together, the flag becomes a beam. So 2 1/8 notes together looks like this. We can also have 4 1/8 notes together or more. The way we count 1/8 notes is put an and on every other 1/8 note. So it sounds like this: 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So we still have the beats coming along, but 1/8 notes only get 1/2 of a beat, so every other 1/8 note gets an and. Playing by all good musicians, whether it's DJ Swamp or Qbert or John Coltrane, Miles Davis, is full of syncopation. Syncopation is where you make the rhythm a little bit more complex by taking a note that would have been on the beat and anticipating it just a little bit. This gives it a little bit of a push. So in this case, what we're going to do is, by using an 1/8 rest, we're going to be moving the downbeat just a little bit earlier. We're going to be playing on the and of 4. And the effect, essentially, is that it seems as though we're pushing that downbeat just a little bit. So in this case, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be playing instead of playing the downbeat of the second bar, I'm going to be coming in on the and of 4, playing 3 quarter notes, and then anticipating the next bar by putting an 1/8 rest on 4 and playing the 1/8 note before the downbeat, or the 1. So it'll sound like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, and. So in essence, I'm anticipating or pushing the downbeat of the second bar. Try it again. 3, 4. Now let me do a few of these just to give you the idea of what the anticipation and syncopation is. Now in that case, I'm just playing all upbeats off of the beat, which is anticipating the next beat. Now you can do all sorts of things with anticipations that really make your playing a lot more interesting and starts getting things syncopated. The 16th note looks like this. It's got the stem and the head, but it has two flags. 16th notes generally will get 1/4 of a count. 4 16th notes together look like this. They have a double beam. And quarter notes, again, get 1 beat each. So we're going 1, 2, 3. When we go up to 8th notes, we double that. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and then 16th notes are twice as fast as that. 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a. So the way you count 16th notes is 1E and a, 2E and a, 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a. So those are 16th notes. Next step is to learn how to use the mixer to start and stop the notes. Now, when I first started scratching, I was using my right hand to manipulate the record and my left hand to do the mixer. After a while, I kind of switched and I started using my right hand to do the mixer because there was more complex things going on there in my playing, and using my left hand on the record. I'm still better at the record in my right hand, and I'm also better at the mixer with my right hand because I'm just right-handed. But I practice both ways, and I try to be as ambidextrous as possible, and I really highly recommend that because there are a lot of different situations and techniques where you want to be able to switch back and forth. So all of these techniques that we're giving you, try doing them both ways, right-handed and left-handed. The mixer has basically 3 different ways of starting and stopping notes. And what I'm going to do here is just play this loop of white noise, and we'll talk about them. The first one is the switch up here. The nice thing about the switch is that it gives you a really sharp attack and a really sharp cutoff. So you're just on and you're off, and sometimes that's exactly what you want. Now the next thing down is the up fader, and you have to have the switch on to use the up fader. The technique here is to use your thumb and your fingers, your thumb to turn it on. And you notice how that actually fades the note in and fades it out a little bit more than the switch, which is just a sharp on and off. Now the third thing that you would want to use is the crossfader right here, and it's probably the most popular control among a lot of scratch DJs. Both the switch and the up fader have to be on for this to work. The basic technique is to think of your thumb as a spring, and it's giving some constant pressure over here, and then your fingers push the crossfader across the cut-in point to turn it on and off. You can get some faster techniques going on with the crossfader, and of course that's what you're going to use to do crabs and things like that. So we have the switch, we have the up fader, we have the crossfader. Triplets are sets of 3 notes that you put into the space that you had 2 notes previously. Let me try to demonstrate this with a beat right here. 1, 2, 3, 4. So quarter notes would just be back and forth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. Now if we go to triplets, ba, 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 triplet, triplet, triplet. So what a lot of music teachers, they teach you to do triplets by saying triplet, triplet, and that works pretty well. So here's a quarter note. 1, 2, 3, 4, triplet, triplet. And as we discussed before, you can do triplets with tears. Ba, 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 ba. Now, you can also do 8th note triplets, which look like this. And here you are cramming 3 8th note triplets in where 2 8th notes lived before. So 8th notes sounded like this: 3, 4, 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 8th note triplets are going to be just a little bit faster and in groups of 3. Ba 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 ba. 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 triplet 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 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and triplet 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 triplet. So that is the concept of triplets. Let's combine both hands, first off with the stab, which is one of the easiest scratches that combine both the record hand and the fader hand. We're going to be using the up fader first, and a stab basically sounds like this. You can use any sound basically for a stab, but the idea is that you turn the fader on, you push the record forward, and then before you stop and start back the other way, you pull the fader all the way back down, so you don't hear the change of direction. All you hear is the forward motion of the record. And that is a stab. Backstabs are just like the stab, except you are doing a backward stroke while the fader is open. So in slow motion here, what we're doing is we're opening up the fader, we're pulling the record back towards us, and then we're closing the fader. Then we are moving the record back forward again to reset the record to do another one. Just like that. Again, you want to make sure that you close the fader before the record changes direction, so you don't hear that change of direction. So here's the backstab, and here's the stab. Sound pretty similar. One's backwards, one forward. Backstab, stab. Let's try scratching with continuous eighth notes in the record hand, basically doing a basic scratch back and forth, and combine that with opening and closing the fader. This has somewhat of a military vibe to it. I've heard Qbert and others call this the military scratch before. So let's start the record with a little bit of a beat on it here, and give this a shot. Get our continuous eighth notes going in the record hand. Now you can also do stabs, or you could even do backstabs, either way. And you can also do this with the crossfader, as well as the up fader. Kind of get that military vibe. A whole note looks like this. It gets 4 counts, or 4 beats, which in 4/4 time is a whole bar, thus the name whole note. Half notes look like these. They get 2 beats, or in 4/4 time, that's half of a bar, so that's why they're called half notes. In the record hand, for counting in 4, a whole note would be something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Half notes would be half as long each, so it would be 1, 2, 3, 4. In the fader hand, whole note would be opening the fader for 4 beats. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Which in this case is a lot of noise. And half notes would be doing the same thing, but just for half as long. 1, 2, 3, 4. And other things obviously could be going on in the record hand, but that in a nutshell is half notes and whole notes. The term drag refers to playing the record hand very slowly, dragging the note out. Quite often these would wind up being half notes and whole notes if we got a beat going. 1, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. You really got to try to get all 4 beats in there. Half notes, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So basically those are drags. A lot of the time you use drags for a technique called the transformer, which was developed in Philadelphia by DJ Spinbad, Cash Money, and DJ Jazzy Jeff. And what you're doing here is you're actually turning on and off the fader very quickly while you're dragging with the record hand. And you can do all sorts of different rhythms with that. So that, in a nutshell, is the transformer. Often when you're cutting, you're using some spoken word that you want to play with, manipulate forwards and backwards, play it over and over again. So let's find a spoken word.
Spin it on a one.
We can use that. Pull it back.
Spin it.
If you've got the time, a lot of times what you'll do is you'll actually mark the beginning of the sample so that you can pull it back to the right spot.
Spin it.
Now in this particular case, this is a little bit tougher than some others because we have a little bit of an S at the top.
Spin it.
And if we don't get the S, we're not going to get the whole spin it. So we're going to get to the top of that S, and we'll mark it right there. Now, if you're freestyling, if you're doing this just improvising, what you have to do is you have to take a look at the label and figure out, where does this sample start with the label. And that works pretty well as well. But marking the records just makes it that much easier. So what you're going to do is we're going to open up the fader and play the sample, and then close the fader, pull it back to the top of the sample.
Spin it on a one.
Like that.
Spin it on a one.
Okay, so this is the beginning. We can also have them say spin it a couple times if we wanted to.
Spin it up. Spin it up. Spin it up. Spin it. Spin it on a one.
Okay, so that's basically it. Combine that with the rhythm.
Spin it on a one. Spin it on a one. Spin it. Spin it. Spin it on a one.
So that in a nutshell is cutting. What you try and do is visualize where the sample is on the record so you can bring it back to the top, or you might even want to just bring it back to certain words within the cutting itself.
Spin it on a one. Spin it on a one. Spin it. Spin it.
Crabs are a technique where you're using the individual fingers on your fader hand to set the fader open and closed very, very rapidly, giving you 16th note triplets, even 32nd notes, and they can be very, very effective. Now, just like any other instrument, the way that I'm going to teach you how to do crabs is maybe a little different than you've seen before, which is basically to slow it down and to use hands separately. This will really work. One way of conceptualizing these, and it's actually very helpful, is to think about just clicking your finger against your thumb very fast, all of your fingers. And once you get it up to speed, that is essentially what you're going to be doing. And if you want to be working on that and working on it, fast as well, that's okay. But you will get a lot more individual dexterity in your fingers and a lot more control over each note if you practice this slowly. The first thing to do is try doing this hand separately. If you can find a record that has a long tone or some white noise, if you have the turntable technique out of the DJ book and record set, the band of white noise is perfect for this. Just to isolate the fader hand and not have to worry about the record hand for a little while. What you want to do is push your thumb against the fader, lightly, not too hard, but lightly, and to where whenever you push a finger across it, it's just going to immediately go right back all the way over to take the note off. So we'll start doing individual fingers, starting with the pinky, and then the ring finger, the middle finger, and the index finger. So one finger at a time, start up our record. And what you're doing here is you want to make sure that each note is about the same as the note before it. Try to get each one of your fingers to give an even tone that is approximately equal to the tone that the other fingers are giving. And you can just keep this going like that. Now, your third and fourth finger, for most people, are weaker than the first and second finger, which get a lot more exercise. So it's a good idea to actually isolate some exercises with just these two fingers. Try just going back and forth between your pinky and your ring finger, and your ring finger and your middle finger. And then I also like to go back and forth between my pinky and my middle. and work your individual fingers that way. Then slowly you can start to speed this up a little bit. Sounds kind of like a train going out of the station. And if you start getting to where it's getting uneven or you're missing fingers, slow it back down again. Work the fingers that you're missing. Now, there's 3-finger crabs and there are 4-finger crabs. I hear some people playing 4-finger crabs and sound like 3-finger crabs. So you want to take it slow, get it up to speed, and make sure that you have good individual dexterity in your fingers. But you should also practice your 3 fingers as well. So when you start speeding up, you want to make sure that you hear the individual attacks, even though they're very rapid. When you're doing your 4-finger crabs, you want to hear 4 distinct notes. And when you're doing your 3-finger crabs, you just need to hear the 3 distinct notes. So work your crabs slowly, work them hands separately, and then start working them with your record hand also getting into the picture. So you're manipulating the record. But slow it back down. Doing your individual fingers like this with the record hand also coming into play. Now you notice it sounds a lot better when you have your record hand in play. It gives it a lot more character. And you can do all sorts of things in the record hand in combination with crabs as well. But keep it nice and slow at first. Speed it up slowly. And then get it up to speed. But make sure you listen very carefully to get good individual attacks from each individual finger. Flares were invented by the lovely and talented DJ Flare, shown to Qbert and made popular by Qbert in the Scratch Pickles. And essentially what it is it's a whole general topic area of technique where you're using the change of direction in the record hand, like with a basic scratch, to differentiate between notes. But you're doing this also with the crossfader as well in conjunction. So, to my understanding, the original flare that DJ Flare came up with was a 3-note pattern that sounded something like this, where what you're doing is you're playing 2 notes by clicking the fader, and then on the 3rd note you're leaving the fader open and just pulling that back. So let me try this really slowly so you can play along, and then we'll slowly just speed it up. So it's essentially a 3-note pattern. Quite often it's done in triplets. Here we go. Slowly we'll speed up. Now, this opens the doors to do all sorts of things. You can actually change the direction of the record with your hand on it as well, obviously. And that's the next thing I'd like for you to try, if you haven't done flares before, is what we're going to be doing is really just cutting a basic scratch in half. Here's your basic scratch. Now, if we were to click the fader right in the middle of that basic scratch, right as we got to the center of that, that would give us twice as many notes. So we're going to try this in 4/4 time, okay? The first note is going to be open the fader, move it up for number 1. 2 will be pulling back with the fader still open. 3, we're going to click the fader on and off, and that will give us the differentiation between the 2nd quarter note and the 3rd quarter note. And then we're going to change direction again for the 4th quarter note. So that sounds pretty convoluted, but it's actually pretty easy. I'll do it really slow. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, like that. So we'll start that slowly, and then we'll slowly speed it up just so you can get the hang of clicking the fader during a basic scratch. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You get the idea? So that is essentially the move that you have to get down to do a flare. Now, you then combine this with all sorts of opening and closing the fader. People talk about 2-click flares and 3-click flares and crescent flares and things like that. And there's any number of permutations that you could come up with once you kind of have the hang of keeping the fader open while you change directions and using fader clicks kind of as differentiations between notes. It's a little bit different way of conceptualizing the thing. But let's try putting another click in there, all right? So what we're going to do is we're going to essentially start right before we do the part of the flare where we change direction, and then we're going to click twice as we come past the body of the move, and then we'll go down to the bottom and do the same thing. It's very symmetrical. So let me demonstrate this for you. I'll slow it down. We're opening the fader up, changing direction, clicking twice, opening it up, changing direction, clicking twice. Now, we'll add another click. This is going to give it, it's interesting, this gives it kind of a Cajun feel. One of the nice things about flares, and one of the reasons I think they blew up the scratch world as much as they did, is that when you're doing flares, it's much easier to kind of get into a triplet-y kind of swing kind of feel, kind of vibe, which makes your playing a lot more jazzy sounding than just, you know, kind of the precision of playing stabs and things like that. So this time we'll open up, and we're going to do one more click. Just like that. So we open up, we change directions, click, click, change directions, click, 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 change directions, click, click, change directions, click, click, change directions, click, click. We'll start that really slowly. Here we go. 3, 4, 1, and 2, and 3, and 4. Now, let's try this with a beat. First, we'll start with this one. This is Tony Bronigal, R&B Drummer of the Year, playing a Cajun beat, just to illustrate how you can make flares into kind of a Cajun vibe. 3, 4. Okay, let's go back and play a few original flares. 2, 3, 4. All right, you get the idea there. And then we'll try a couple 2-click flares as well. 3, 4. Which also work very well as triplets. So, that's the short course on flares. Experiment around, come up with your own patterns, and just try to really make them swing. Let's try combining some crabs and some flares. Once you start getting down different techniques, the next thing you want to do is try to combine them, get different combinations together. And essentially, once you start improvising, you're just freely interchanging all the different techniques that you've learned and things that you've thought up on your own and developing your own style to combine things. So just to give you an example of that, we're going to try combining a flare and putting a crab in the middle of it, just for fun, just to give you some food for thought. So what we'll be doing is, instead of doing a flare where we're just doing, say, like a 2-click flare or a 3-click flare is in the middle. Instead of just doing a couple clicks, what if we threw in a crab? Which seems easy enough. Let's try this really slowly. And let's even try it with a beat. Try it with a nice slow beat. Now, one thing I do when I'm learning something slowly is I'll just speed up the record a little bit and try it up to the next speed. And I recommend that you do that. Then eventually you can just double the speed of whatever you're doing to get it up to that next level. So, think up your own combinations, put them together, practice them slow, get them up to tempo, and then just be blazing. Learning how to play the turntable is like learning to play any musical instrument. You need to practice to become the player you want to be. The tips, tricks, and techniques are here, but if you don't use them, you'll lose them. To help you develop your scratching, beat matching, mixing, cutting, and other skills, I encourage you to pick up Turntable Technique, The Art of the DJ, the book and vinyl set. The hands-on exercises can be used every day and will help you become the DJ you want to be. To get the book and vinyl set, ask for it at your local retailer, go to toolsfordjs.com, or call 1-866-Berkle.